Thank you, David, for asking me to present what we have done so far, what will be done in the future on this important topic. And also, I would like to thank my friend and colleague, Rick Bennett, here in the room, who helped me in revising the presentation. As you know, making a presentation in such a forum is not an easy task, and you may risk to be boring or to say things that you don't want to say, but of course, and I just realized that I started with a wrong move, because after the presentation that we had just 1 minute ago, I will start with stating a requirement of the SPA-HOFO. So yeah, we are rulemaking. Of course, this requirement will introduce the mysterious Class A HTAWS, and I will try to explain what is that, and based on which consideration the CAUK came up with a new proposed standard that we are trying to foster by any means that is possible. And so we'll tell you what we are doing in this respect in the short and long term, what is our plan, and most important, what is the impact on your fleet for you that are operating offshore operations. So the requirement, here is it. We are rulemaking details, and you know that this requirement, SPA-HOFO 160C, will ask to any aircraft which is performing offshore operations, CAT operations, with a maximum certificated takeoff mass more than 3,175 kilos or 7,000 pounds, it's the same, or more than 9 passenger seats, and with first issued COA after 31st of December 2018, so basically tomorrow, shall be equipped with an HTAWS that meets a Class A equipment and specified in an acceptable standard. So the first question is, why is a Class A equipment? Well, because it's better than a Class B, no? But what do you mean by Class A equipment HTAWS, and what is the acceptable standard? Well, I'm sorry to kill all your expectation after just one slide, but let me tell you that there is no Class A HTAWS at all in any regulation, in any standard. The only existing standard, ETSO C194 for HTAWS, does not contain any class definition, while classes and applicable requirements for classes are named into a fixed wing standard, which is the TSO C151. And before you go any further, let me also tell you that HTAWS are not even equal to Class B TAWS. Actually, you may easily find out that the requirement SPA-HOFO 160C was put forward in an opinion in 2013, regulating HOFO operation. And in the explanatory note, there is a reference to the ICAO Annex 6, Volume 3, for the recommendation on the HTAWS, which only talks about forward-looking modes. So if you are looking for an applicable standard to HTAWS, the ETSO C194 is the only one that we have today. This table may help you to summarize what is the situation, the current situation. If you have a TSO compliant HTAWS, that is all you get here. So you have the forward-looking terrain avoidance, and you have the terrain displaying information. The altitude source in the ETSO is recalled to be anyone that is suitable for the intended use, while this is the TSO TAWS applicable for fixed wing, and here you have the definition of classes and Class B and the difference between Class B and Class A. So as you can see, basically, this is the helicopter world, this is the aeroplane's world. And as I told you, the HTAWS are not even equal to Class B, and of course not equal to Class A TAWS. However, if we would like to make any comparison and how can we jump from an HTAWS TSO compliant today to a Class A TAWS, we would recognize that the most important things that may be added to an HTAWS are the GPWS modes, the so-called modes or alerting function. Call them as you wish. I like more the word alerting function because it gives you the idea. GPWS, for those of you that are not very familiar with an acronym, means Ground Proximity Warning System. So remember the numbers here because we will recall some of these numbers. So we should have GPWS alerting functions into the HTAWS. Thanks God, the good news is that most of the HTAWS installed in the majority of the fleet, which is used on offshore operations, have the GPWS alerting function on them. And however, those functions are not standardized because they are not covered by any TSO standard. So you can find that any helicopter has a different GPWS function. Any helicopter, they change even with the same box between one helicopter type and the other. Those functions are usually derived from fixed wing TAWS functions, so manufacturers have applied just to HTAWS, but of course they're not optimized for helicopters and their operations. So imagine not even for offshore. And of course, most of them will result in insufficient alert time. So this is in addition to the fact that is a given, and we know that forward-looking modes in the HTAWS create a lot of nuisance alerts. And this is one of the reasons, for example, is that the obstacle database considers the oil and gas platforms an obstacle, but that's where you want to land. So while you are landing on the platform, you get an obstacle warning. All this today is resulting in the tendency of some crews and operators to switch off the TAWS, the HTAWS, or to inhibit their warning. And of course, that's not what we want. So it is true that we regulate too much, but if we regulate, there must be a meaning. And I would like to recall also the presentation from our colleagues from EASA yesterday, where they say, if you give an information to the pilot, that must be meaningful, that must be reliable. And if it's not reliable, it has, of course, we should expect that the pilot does not use it. And remember, these are warning and caution information, so the pilot is compelling to those, is compelled by those informations. So based on these considerations, CAUK brought up a new proposed standard for HTAWS to be used in offshore operations. They started with a research, and it's a very beautiful research, where they started to analyze the warning times of the existing HTAWS classic modes and the nuisance alerts, based on the available data from several accident and incidents, flight simulator runs, and FDM, a lot of FDM data from different operators. And it's, this report is published in a CAP 1538, and based on this CAP, then developed the new proposed standard. The standard proposed some improvements for offshore HTAWS. The first is the standardization of GPWS envelopes and alerting function, which is an interesting thing to be taken into account not only for offshore operations, but also for all the other onshore operations, which we don't have today. They propose to increase the envelopes in order to increase the warning time for alert functions 1, 3, 4, 6. I'm not listing all these functions here because I told you you may get bored of it. Just go back and in the previous slide, you will see what are these alerting function numbers. And of course, increased based with reference to what? If there's no standard, of course, we have to increase based starting from a reference point. And they chose as a reference point the existing Honeywell Mark 22 EGPWS. They suggest to exclude the alert for excessive terrain closure rate, which is also called mode number 2, because it's really not applicable to offshore environment. However, this is one of the topics that we are still discussing, but most of the interested parties are going in this direction. They propose to add a new alert function for airspeed versus torque. I will tell you about this in a minute. And of course, in order to reduce the nuisance alerts, their proposal is to exclude the oil and gas platforms from the offshore obstacle database. One thing that we have to mention here, very important, human-machine interface aspects are not addressed yet in this proposal. There is a Cranfield University research that they have asked for this project. The report is about to be published in another CAP by CAUK, and the results and the proposal out of these results will be brought into the CAP 1519 as well in the future. So as I told you, I will talk about the airspeed versus torque new mode. Basically, the intent is to give a pilot a caution or a warning whenever the airspeed gets too low as compared to the torque set up by the pilot. Of course, we are talking about the low-speed regime. You may understand that the envelope of this function is based at least on helicopter type, and they are proposing an envelope for each and every helicopter. So what is EASA doing out of this proposal? EASA is fully supporting this CAP 1519 as an improvement of the offshore oil and gas operation safety. CAUK approached us about 2 years ago where they were still drafting the proposed standard and asked us to take action. And we did basically two things. The first thing is to establish a working group, which is not an official working group I have just discovered, but the attendance and the participation, the active participation by all parties is really big, and that is really giving a lot of good results, and we are also progressing very fast. The working group is mainly volunteered by helicopter manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, operators, and certification authorities. The discussion has been started since October 2017 and has been basically based on 2 pillars. One is the implementation plan, because we want to be sure that manufacturers will bring into the fleet the proposed standard as soon as possible. And of course, in parallel, we discuss about the technical aspects of the proposed standard. So on the technical side, we have just reached an agreement that alert functions 1, 3, 4 seems to be feasible as they are proposed in the CAP 1519 with no big showstoppers. Of course, there are things that may need some design adjustment, like the OEI condition, because some alerts may not be prioritized in OEI, so the HTAWS box should recognize the condition of OEI, as well as Cat A takeoff. You may not want some some alerts during Cat-A takeoff or during auto-rotation. So some of them, as I told you, are have to be dealt with some design adjustments, but some of them can be solved by means of RFM entries, so that the crew is aware of what the system is doing. The alert function 6, so the altitude call out seems to be easy to be left out, because it's basically a repetition of the radar altitude call out that is already compulsory by CAT EASA 145H. Again, another regulation, sorry for that, but at least we are covered. The new alert function 7 needs still some development before being ready to be implemented in the fleet. We have agreed that the function between torque and airspeed for each and every helicopter is too much dependent from the flight conditions, from the weight, from the temperature, and the aircraft configuration. And therefore, you cannot define a unique envelope for each and every helicopter. Also knowing that in one single mission, your weight could change a lot, and therefore, in one part of the mission, you could have nuisance alerts because you are going very close to that envelope. In another part of the mission, you cannot get any warning at all because your torque versus airspeed is too high compared to the envelope that you are proposing. So we said that we need to investigate more, to make some more testing and analysis in order to define if this mold is a valid one, and what is the way in which we can implement it in the Indian helicopter. One thing very interesting that came out from the discussion is that the GPWS alert functions may not be tied to the HTAWS only. Today we have a very integrated avionics systems, AEFCS, that will be able to give the same warnings to the pilot without being generated by a single box, but by the avionics system in general. Of course, this may need more time for development and certification. So it's a true fact, it's a statement. We are going to take this into account, but it's not something that we would see in the near future in the fleet. Last but not least, of course, you may see also in other application the offshore functions as they are proposed by the CAP 1519 should be segregated by the other ones. We have discussed also if the switch from an offshore function of the HTAWS to the onshore, vice versa, is to be manual or automatic. But it's, of course, this is something again that is we have achieved as a result of the discussion of this working group. The second action that EASA is taken is to foster the establishment of a working group at the Eurokai level. CAK 2 years ago approached us by saying, we would like you to take this standard and make an ETSO out of it. And we explained them that the process for creating an ETSO goes through the creation of a working group at Eurokai level, which will create a minimum operating performance specification then, and this performance specification will then be referenced into the TSO. So the working group 110 has been established. The kickoff meeting is going to be next week. The terms of reference asked for a deliverable by end of 2020, being a new MOPS for offshore HTAWS. Of course, the starting point will be the CAP 1519, and will also address HMI aspects based on the Camfrey research that I just told you before. We are still discussing what the beauty of the things is that all the people around the table of the working group 110 are the same that are participating to the discussions in the working group with the EASA. So basically, it's a natural progress of all the work done so far. And we have to decide, but most probably we will create, based on these new MOPs, a new TSO, which will be in addition to the C194. And of course, as I told you, onshore aspects are not to be left out. Therefore, as a second priority, the group has been given the objective of creating new MOPs for GPWS function for onshore as well. So, do we have a plan? Yes, of course. And guess what? The plan is made to be, of course, unattended, but we'll try to do it. In the short term, this is almost sure, so you can take it as for granted. Manufacturers have promised to submit for the offshore fleet, for the existing offshore fleet, a subset of the new GPWS functions for offshore. Mode 7, as I told you, is excluded. Oil and gas platform will be excluded from the obstacle database for offshore. And the implementation on new and existing helicopters for the time being will be on a voluntary basis via major changes or SDCs. In the midterm, we are planning to have new GPS functions available for helicopter avionics or HTAWS. So we will implement this new capability from the helicopter avionics and not only from the HTAWS. And of course, all the modes should be included. In the long term, after the ETSO will be issued, that we plan that all new helicopters should have new TSO implemented. This course of action for the time being is also reflected in an FAQ, which has been recently published in the EASA website. And basically, this FAQ tells you that so far, an HTAWS, which is ETSO C194 or TSO C194 compliant, is acceptable. An HTAWS with any, which is TSO compliant with any other improved feature, such as those derived from CAP 1519, is acceptable as well. And of course, don't forget that we have a rulemaking task 708 on HTAWS that may change these requirements in the future, and we rely on these rulemaking tasks to change the, of course, even the wording of the SPAO for 160, because as I told you, we ask for a Class A HTAWS, which basically does not exist at all. Of course, this may not be of interest for all people in the room here, but a certification memorandum will be issued very soon in order to provide guidance on the certification process on this aspect. So, there are stars on the screen. It's Christmas time. We need the stars. So let's see where these stars are and what they are for. This beautiful table is how would like to answer to the question, what is the impact for your fleet on all this? On the first column, if you have an helicopter whose COA has been issued before 31st of December 2018, in order to comply with the SPAO for requirement, you don't need an HTAWS. However, if you want to add more safety benefit, you can add an ETSO compliant HTAWS. the vast majority of the HTAWS out in the market are ETSO compliant today. I think there is only one which is still not compliant, does not have the ETSO approval. If you want to add more, ask for a GPWS alerting function, which you have to remember they are not TSO'd. If you want even more, you can ask for CAP 1519 implementation. If your COA is being issued after the 31st of December, then the ETSO C194 HTAWS becomes mandatory. However, if you want to add more safety benefit, you can add a GPS alerting functions and a CAP 1519 based function. In the future, after the new TSO will be issued, you will have mandatory you will have to install these equipment in your helicopter in order to be compliant with this powerful 160. Of course, in the longer term, we plan to work on the rulemaking task 708, and also we are thinking to propose a retrofit of the existing fleet in order to bring any helicopter up to this level. So this is what may change in the future, but of course, don't take it for granted. And I will be happy to answer any question.